Hello, this is Ed from South River Outfitters. Welcome to Kayak Fishing with the Pros. At this event, you can learn from the country's top kayak anglers. We will share their best practices and tips for hooking and landing more fish. From rigging the kayaks to choosing the right lure, these professional anglers will share it all at this event. You can learn in one day what would take years to learn on your own. Here we have Christina Weber from the Hobie Fishing Team, and she's going to speak about rod selection and other best practices for catching fish. Thanks for joining us.
I do all different types of fishing. Florida allows us to really experience a lot of different varieties of species, so I take full advantage of that. Do y'all want to be in part of this? So I do freshwater, saltwater, so saltwater inshore and offshore. I definitely like to do a lot of bass fishing. That's kind of one of my favorite things to do. I started when I was 15 fishing bass tournaments, and 5 years ago I transferred over to kayak fishing. And the reason I got into kayak fishing is because I was looking to purchase a boat, but I kept running into these dilemmas of, this boat is great if I want to pull the flats on Mosquito Lagoon for redfish all day. This boat is great if I want to do all this bass fishing. And then this boat is great if I really just want to go offshore. But the best part about kayaks is that this boat is great to do all of those. And I can do all of those well. I can present things well. I can fish in moving water. I can fish with the wind. I mean, there really is no limits. I kind of feel like I'm beating down the door all the time with this, but this really is a boat that allows you to be limitless. And since I kind of do a variety of different fishing, and you had all of these wonderful guys out here speaking earlier, I'm going to just talk about rods. And I'm not necessarily going to be standing up here selling you a brand. It's more just how to kind of dissect rods and how do I pick a rod for bass fishing versus going red fishing versus going offshore and drifting a live bait. There's just so many moving parts, and I can stand up here and tell you all these techniques, and you learned a lot of different things from these people today, and it was wonderful. But unless you have the right rod, you're kind of just out there throwing things around. So this is kind of where the magic happens, and I think it's, nobody really takes advantage of it, and I'm really excited. I really like rods. I'm kind of like a little rod nerd. I build rods myself. It's not something that I do for a living. It's not something I'm really willing to do for anybody. I just build rods for fun. Having sometimes running into certain things that I wanted, it just naturally started I should just build this. And I'll tell you why. So we'll start with maybe some inshore stuff. So I have kind of I just brought one of my inshore setups. These are going to be my freshwater. This is some offshore tackle, and this is some inshore and offshore. So you kind of have a variety of things. Try to cover it all. We'll definitely do questions after, so hopefully y'all can remember, and hopefully I'll just kind of give you guys some information to swallow, and I won't go too crazy. So something for inshore, they're really I'll cover some myths of rods. There is no one rod that's going to do everything for you. We try, as kayak fishermen, we're super limited to this space. So we really need to capitalize on certain rods that are going to allow us to present certain baits properly, which can be very difficult, especially when it comes to bass fishing. There's just so many different things, and it doesn't, I try to bring 4 rods comfortably. Because I'm going to fish one, I'm going to hold one and fish one, and then I can have 3 behind me. But so for inshore, something like this is really light tackle, and every fisherman is different. So it's kind of the fun part about learning and coming to a group event is that everybody's going to give you a little bit something different of their style. So my style is super light tackle. Sometimes I get angry at myself for liking light tackle so much, but it's really fun, and I'll lose a fish. I don't even care. I like light tackle. So this is a 7/6 spinning rod. This is a 6 to 12 pound class line weight, Now, line weight can be very difficult. We walk into a store and we look at the rod and it says it's a 6 to 12. Well, that only means I can throw 6 to 12. No, it doesn't. You could put, braid is going to be a little bit more damaging to your tackle, but that's okay if you're doing everything properly. You could do a 20-pound test braid on this if you wanted to. So that doesn't have anything, the line class does not have anything to do with actual line class, so it gets a little confusing. But I have 10-pound test braid on this, and again, this is a 7.6. So this blank right here is super light. I like this because it gives me, having a 7.6 allows you to give you some capitalizing on casting distance. A lot of times I don't have the availability in the kayak to really start moving around quickly. So being able to cast to things is important. And as Mark said earlier when he was talking about sight casting, you only get one opportunity a lot of times to cast at a redfish, to cast at a snook, to cast at anything, bass. And if you can't reach that fish, you're just missing opportunities. So having something that's long allows you to cast further. This is very light, so this allows me to use super light baits, something like this that's really, really small, but big fish will eat this. So having, lighter rod, you can kind of see the flex in this. It's a light action. Even if I was just to hold this, you can see that it is light. So it's got a really light tip. It allows me to whip baits. Something that's heavier, it's not gonna give me that whip action. And when it's windy, you should be able to utilize having something that whips, because you're still gonna go fishing when it's windy. You're still gonna wanna throw light baits. That's kind of where we sometimes make mistakes is, well, it's windy, I need to throw something really heavy, or I can't cast as far, or you start to use these crutches that if you just had the right rod, you would still be able to fish properly. You'd still be able to present things the right way. So I like something like this for inshore. You can go heavier. I have a 2500 Shimano Stratic on here, but you could go to a 3000. The 3000 is going to be the same body profile, give you a little bit more line capacity. Most men tend to go something larger, which is fine. I just want something small. I'm not doing anything crazy. So something like, I fished this on the flats. I skip dock lights with this. Again, having that light tip will really allow me to give something really small. I'll be able to cast it far. I'll be able to skip it under docks. So that's kind of the technique for something like this. If I wanted to throw something heavier, I could go to a medium heavy rod. I could still kind of keep the same profile, something that's gonna have a really light tip, but a little bit more backbone. You'll find it here more than anything. And then you can throw some heavier things and really bow up on one of those fish if you're fishing for bigger reds or bigger snook, something you have to put pressure on so it doesn't basically break you off. Going into some freshwater is kind of fun because there really are just so many different techniques. There is that saying with bass fishermen, we have to have 100 rods, we have to have all this tackle, and I wish I could understand why it's like that. I'm a bass fisherman and I don't know. My tackle box when I go inshore is this big, and then I got tackle from the front to the back when it's bass fishing. Just things are everywhere. So you'll find a lot in Florida, we have a lot of vegetation. So when you're throwing a worm, you have a lot of elements working against you in bass fishing. You have a lot of vegetation. You a lot of the times are working something that's weedless, and you're fishing in heavy coverage. Bass fishermen use heavier things, not because the fish are big, but because of the baits we're presenting. It's all about presentation. It's all about making things work right. And when you have a plastic that's super thick, now not only do you have to set the hook through the plastic, but you have to get it in that fish's mouth, you have to get it through the grass. So you have all these elements. So if you have a worm rod, you're gonna have something that's gonna be a little, not too heavy, and every fisherman is gonna have their version of a worm rod. So this is, just to give you an example, this is a 7-foot, 3-inch, 12 to 20. That kind of sounds really crazy. 12 to 20, I use that for snook fishing. This is, in a bait caster, things are kind of dispersed a little bit differently. And you're fishing differently. So a 12 to 20 is actually really not that heavy, but even with a worm rod, you're gonna utilize that because you have to set the hook. So you have all these things that, the 3 inches is nice to have. No, it's nothing crazy. You're gonna go to the store and say like, what's that 3 inches added on there for? That 3 inches kind of makes a big difference. You sometimes will get a lighter tip versus a 7 foot that's a 12 to 20. That won't have, it'll just be a 7 foot. So you kind of get to that point where you lost a lot of this light tip. So sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't. That kind of comes to as your style of fishing. But for me, I like it. Anything added extra, especially in the kayak. This is kind of where I'd be sitting. And if I need to maneuver the front of the boat, I still have a little bit to work with. So worm rod, anything in the medium heavy range, 7 foot, 7'3", that's a great like range just to give yourself to go shopping for. And a bait caster, I don't know. Bass fishing is really where you're gonna use the bait casters. I've seen some people talk about spinning rods and bait casters and they kind of jump to this. Spinning rods are a better one. They're blah, 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 all these reasons. There's a reason why every bass fisherman is using a bait caster to present 90% of their baits. Once they go over to something more finesse, that's when they break it down to their lighter spinning rods for exactly the same reasons I was talking about for redfish or, you know, just any inshore light tackle, redfish, snook. You need it to be light to present those baits. If you're going to do a style of fishing and bass fishing also is a flipping pitching. It's when you you're standing, you're fishing you fish a small area for the most part over a slow amount of time. You flip into little pockets and the fish are sitting right in there. So you are fishing in very heavy coverage and you're doing really short casts, basically the length of your rod. You're kind of just doing casts in here. You're not fishing over there, you're not looking over there, you're literally looking right here at your feet. So it's a really straight up and down. Think of it if anybody fishes a bridge. If you're fishing a bridge, it's a lot of straight up and down. You have a really heavy rod, a lot of backbone, because you really have to put a lot of heat and pressure on that fish straight up and down. It's very different than when you're fishing and your rod is bending in a different direction. It's kind of not fully bent over. So why bass fishermen are using a heavy rod is because of the styles and the presentations. So when you're flipping into a smaller hole, and it's in these, in heavy grass, you really have to have some heavy backbone to give that instant setup. This is just to give you an idea, this is a 7.6, 15 to 30, and I am using it for bass fishing, and this is kind of light. But I only use it for that style of fishing. So there's all these, like this is hard. You go into a store and you look at the label, 15 to 30. I'm just going bass fishing. Well, what kind of bass fishing are you doing? It's really like not species oriented or anything like that. Like, yes, obviously I'm not going bass fishing with this. There's kind of a line there. But you really, when you go looking for a rod, you really want to focus on what style, what am I presenting to this fish? Am I throwing a worm? Am I throwing topwater? Am I throwing a crankbait? Am I throwing a lipless? Am I fishing heavy jigs? Am I throwing a hoagie? Really that is where it is, because if you're throwing those things, you're already naturally fishing for a specific species. But if you go in with the mindset, like I'm just going bass fishing or I'm just going for snooks on the flats, this kind of doesn't help you very much. Because this is where it gets crazy. 15 to 30 is really heavy. You wouldn't think about that for bass fishing. But again, it's for a specific reason. Heavy coverage. You have to lift it out of the grass. You really want that instant setup. Now, if you're fishing with, we don't do much, well, I should take that back. There is this preconceived notion that we don't throw a lot of crankbaits in Florida. I actually really like to throw crankbaits in Florida. There's a lot of, if you can learn to work a crankbait, little small square bill through the grass, like hydrilla on top, it's like a little candy time. It's fun. Those bass love it. And it's kind of fun for you because you're like, You bob and weave through the grass. It's a lot of fun. You're working with treble hooks. So naturally we all want to throw anything that's weedless in the grass. I totally get it. I'm the same way. Like, that's really how you present the best baits. You get down deep where the fish are sitting. But if you want to, throwing little square bills and things is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of opportunity for it in Florida, and I don't think too many people capitalize on it. This is a little bit big. I have some smaller things I like to throw, but if you're throwing a crankbait, even if I'm fishing in grass, I have fluorocarbon on here, and that's going to be, come down to a personal preference with some people if you want to throw fluorocarbon or mono, but I like to throw fluorocarbon. It's a little bit stronger, it's a little bit harder, so I have like the availability to kind of like horse my crankbait through the grass and through some rocks. And plus I'm so used to throwing braid, it's nice for me. But a crankbait rod is gonna be super light because of the presentation that you're giving. You want the best way to throw a crankbait, the best way to throw a little square bill, the best way to throw your lipless is by allowing this to bounce off of things, whether it's grass, whether it's rocks, whether it's anything. That's how it presents. You can't have you can't have your flipping rod because this doesn't have action to it. It's literally a stick. This has a lot of bend in it. You can kind of see it's very, very light, very light. When I throw this will allow me to whip these baits, but it'll give it bend and give. So when it's knocking around, it doesn't get hung up instantly. And that's kind of where people get frustrated with things. Well, I got this rod and I'm throwing all these things and it just gets hung up everywhere. Well, yeah, you have a worm rod, you're trying to throw a crankbait and it will work, but you're going to get frustrated and it's going to become a little bit difficult for you. So if you can, you slowly start to invest in rods to, base around your presentations. And that's where you're going to capitalize, and you're going to do really well, and you're going to have an exciting day in the water. So this rod, something that I throw a crankbait with, this is again a 7-6 and 8 to 15. This is 14-pound test fluorocarbon. You could go heavier, you could go lighter. It's up to you. It's not going to make a difference. It'll make a difference in the action of your bait more than anything than the rod's presentation. But again, this is something light. It's got a really light tip to it, so it allows that bait to bounce. Doesn't actually instantly set. Going into this is new to my life, and I'm so excited to catch tarpon on it this season. Yes, I know. That's going to happen. I mean, I'm really excited about this. So I've been catching tarpon off of a 5,000 for the last decade of my life. And I decided to finally invest in something real so I'm not killing myself. But I have a Shimano Sustain 10,000, and it looks kind of big, but it's really not. For a 10,000, I feel like it's kind of small. And this was a custom-made rod. I think, I'm not a giant believer in everything needs to be custom. I'm a fisherman. I like to spoil myself with goodies and things that this is mine, you can't buy this at the store. But that's just a fisherman thing. You can find really great rods in the store. Just make sure it's obviously what you're looking for. But this is a custom-made rod. This is a 710. So it's kind of short in a way. Actually, this rod was originally an 8-foot rod, but we cut it a little bit so I didn't have such a light tip because I'm throwing big hoagie lures in current, and I'm catching tarpon from the kayak. So I wanted something that was going to be a lot more stronger and give me a lot more backbone, something I could put a lot of pressure to. I didn't really need that light tip. It wasn't going to benefit me on any level. So we just cut it off. Well, you cut it off the back way, but just cut it off. And this is a 15 to 40. So I'm not, just to revisit something, it's 15 to 40. This is 65-pound test braid. I'm going to be using an 80-pound leader most likely. I might bounce around 60 to 80. And I'm obviously catching fish that are not only 40 pounds. I sold tackle for a really long time, for 5 years, and that was really difficult for a lot of people to wrap their head around. Well, I'm catching fish that are big fish. Like they might be 40 pounds. I need a 60-pound rod. Not the case. It's just the style of rod. It's just the weight of the rod, which can be a little confusing, and I don't even know if I know how to explain this properly. But you can obviously catch larger fish on smaller tackle. I think it's actually going to be easier on you in the long run on some ways, and it's lighter. So that's my favorite part. You know, I'm throwing big tackle, I'm throwing heavy things, and so something like this would be good for tarpon, snook, those bigger snook around bridges and pilings. I'm still presenting baits. I'm not just throwing like live bait out and letting it sit. That's, you know, this is actually going to help me present things. And you can do a lot with it. So it looks little, but it's big. And this is another setup I have for catching tarpon. This is really small and light, but it's a lot of fun. You can do it. I've done it. I think my biggest tarpon on this is 110, and I wanted to cry because this is really small. But I did it. It's fun. That was one of those moments where I'm like, why do I refuse to fish with anything heavier? That light tackle person in me just can't get rid of it. So this is, again, a spinning setup. Spinning setups are really convenient when you're doing a lot of casting. They really, you do just do a lot of casting with them. So that's why you find a lot of these heavier things, and when we're presenting heavier baits, you are able to do a lot of casting with it. You can cast with a conventional setup, but it's really not that easy, and you're just gonna frustrate yourself, which is why we all have to have a million rods. So this is an 8-foot, I believe. This is an 8-foot, 20, I think it's a 15 to 20, possibly. So it's fairly light, all cork, and I have titanium guides on this. So the titanium are nice, they're strong, they're light, they're good for saltwater, all that jazz. You don't need anything crazy, but that's kind of her. Nothing, you know, this is a really fun setup. I do a lot of different styles of fishing. I think if everybody could get themselves something around this size, if they're doing any saltwater, around bridges and docks and pilings and anything a little heavier. It's kind of long if you wanted to go and do some like tight quarters, but it's really nice for, you know, I throw some like fishing bridges and stuff for snook. This is one of my favorite rods. I can cast far away from the snook. I don't have to be up on them. I can actually cast on the other side of the bridge, present it all the way through the bridge, and I can almost fish both shadow lines with something a little longer. So there's a lot of benefits there. And the 5,000 is really small. It still allows me to hold a like 40-pound braid, 65 if I wanted to, and it's still gonna allow me a lot of line. And the action is pretty heavy. It's got a little light tip. I think this is considered a medium heavy. I don't even know what this is. This is so old, and but it's pretty cool. It's one of my favorite ones. That's a good range for somebody. Anything for offshore starts to get a little heavy and crazy. One of my favorite things about fishing in the kayak offshore, and Brian's going to be much better. He's going to go over so many wonderful things here in a little bit for offshore fishing, but just a little tidbit on my side is vertical jigging. I have a vertical jigging rod that's conventional. If you try to dabble in this at all, I suggest that you do it spinning style. It's much easier. Getting in the kayak and trying to vertical jig with a conventional setup, and I'm trying to level wind and all these things. It's a lot going on. But I do it, and I get out there and I rock it. So, but vertical jigging is really cool. It's easy to do from the kayak. What it is just you have literally a jig. It's just lead, painted lead. They come in a few different shapes and sizes. You're usually pretty like slender and long, but they basically dart through the water. And this rod, there is this special rod for them, and because you're doing so much work, and you're reeling and you're jigging and all this stuff, and it's a very fast action. This rod was designed for vertical jigging for these rods. Look, see how skinny and small this rod is? Like, you would not really think that this is very strong. Naturally, you look up at the wall of all the rods and you kind of look like, oh, I'm looking for something heavy. So you kind of naturally go to something that might be a little bit thicker. Vertical jigging rods are really cool. This is an 80 to 200 pound class rod, and it is super, super small. This is why rods can be so confusing, and this is why we need millions of them. But this is the coolest thing about rods, is that there's just so much to know about them. But back to vertical jigging rods. So this rod right here, you'll find a lot of people, the trend of vertical jigging kind of skyrocketed through the roof, and everybody was wanting to do vertical jigging. It was this really cool thing, and it kind of keeps you busy on the boat while you're live baiting. But then everybody started to realize, like, this is a really small, low profile rod, and I can actually cast with this. I can actually present artificial baits with this because it was designed for that. And I don't have to vertical jig with it. So you got this rod, and now all the snook fishermen are using it at the spillways, and people are casting and presenting baits. So it's just a super cool rod. You could actually buy one of these, a spinning one, and kind of replace it in a sense for like the rod that I have here. They make them fairly long. They're very, very skinny. They're very small, low profile, and they're very light. So you can actually hold this and fish this all day long. You have a really strong rod that you can put a lot of heat on. And it's designed for that up and down motion. So for someone who's fishing on a bridge or anything, you can really put a lot of pressure on your rod and still get this super low profile rod. But it's very cool. I highly suggest, looking into something like that if you wanting to play with anything offshore or even some inshore stuff. It's fun, especially for women. We don't naturally want to hold something that's really heavy all day long. It just kind of wears us out. And this allows you to get something heavier and lighter at the same time. This is a rod that I would use for live bait. Everybody, again, is going to kind of have their own little style of things, but this is one of my favorites. And I bought this for trolling, and obviously I don't really use it in the kayak anymore. So I transferred it over to a live bait rod. I'm able to, I have a lot of drag options with a conventional setup, which is why I like to play with conventionals when I do any sort of, and I only use live bait offshore, so when I'm using live bait, and I just have a lot of options. So using a conventional rod, I get something really heavy, but this is a 6 foot 12 or 20 to 30. Still very light. I can still fight a fish for a very long time. It's not too long to where it kind of gets in the way. It still allows me to kind of snake this rod around. A lot of the times when you have a big fish on, I kind of have to weave it in and out of things. So having a shorter rod allows me to do that. And it's still going to be very heavy. So having a conventional setup for your offshore, that's kind of natural. Most people tend to go to that, but spinning is popular also. So you could do, if you wanted to, this would probably be a better setup for your live bait. It's a little heavier, it's just gonna be heavier. Allow you to really assist you in catching that rod or that fish. It's really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is catch fish, and you don't want to kill yourself. So there's a lot of things to help you, like rods, so we should use them. And that's what I like to talk about. So I have some kind of fun rod myths and that kind of go along with everything that I'm talking about. So some of them are, I talked about this earlier, but there is no such thing as one rod that's going to do everything properly. I know we all really want to try to do that, but it's just not going to happen. So my best advice is to just start to what do you like to use most? We all have a style, and I can tell you all day long that you have to go do this, but your heart, you want to go throw that Cinco. That is what you like to do. So you should get a rod that really allows you to do that, a worm rod. And then you can start to progress into other rods. There's also a lot of like another myth, there is no freshwater and saltwater. There are rods to do, like this is very much for going offshore, which is saltwater. But these can be for both. These can be for saltwater or freshwater. So there really is no, like, you can't go in a store and look at it and assume that this rod was built for saltwater or freshwater, because you can use everything for everything. There's no component that makes this handle the saltwater better. The EVA foam is just easier to work with, and reaming cork is not a lot of fun. That's why you find a lot of your offshore rods with an EVA, because it's much easier to work with, and cork doesn't come that way. It comes like this, and you have to make it like that. So it comes to be a little difficult. Let's see. So I talked about this earlier also. The thicker the rod, the heavier. It's not the case at all. A lot of the times, the thicker the rod, the most inexpensive it almost is going to be. Because you can walk in and you'll look at all these rods and you'll see this rod's $200 and it looks measly, and then it's next to a $50 rod. You know, there's a lot of factors working into that, and I will go over that. But that's just something to keep in mind when picking out a rod. Just looks are deceiving, you know, and that's kind of what I was trying to make a point with the vertical jigging rod. It's a very small, low profile reel, but it's very, very strong, and it still allows you to do a lot of different things. Unlike a trolling rod, doesn't really allow you to do very much. You kind of just let it sit there, just as a rod that sits on the boat. But a vertical jigging rod is built around more presentations. I know I touched base on the spinning rods versus bait casters. Which one is better? There is no one that is better, just as what you're doing. What are you presenting? How are you trying to present this? Again, to just revisit that. There's benefits to both of them. And again, if we can go over that more into detail, I know I've been talking to some of you already about some things, and I think, like, you know, you have a buddy who likes to fish one way, so you naturally will end up going that way, but that doesn't always mean it's going to be the right way for you. So hopefully I can help with that. Something I like to help a lot of people on is telling the difference in why your money is being spent where it's being spent when you purchase. I always encourage people, like, spend the money on a rod. Like, I really, like, frustrates me when people just, and I get it, like, money doesn't grow on trees, but if you can spend the money, extra money on a rod, it's wonderful. It really will go a long way. It makes your life so much easier. You're wondering why does Sydney always flip into the grass and she never misses a fish? Every time she flips into that grass, and I miss a fish every time. A lot of times it's because your rod is not allowing you to do what Sydney's doing. She's got the right setup. She's got her stuff going on. She's like a professional out there. And so if you can do that, hopefully some of the things I took, I mean, there's just, I could go all day long trying to keep structure a little bit. But if you can, get yourself a rod. Having more guides on a rod is going to add price and value to the rod. There's different qualities of EVA and cork. That adds value to the rod. The blank, you know, your blanks, there's spines to these blanks. A lot of times in a cheaper rod, they don't find the spine properly to the blank, or the spine is hardly even there. And a spine is just like we have. We bend in one, you know, well, some people bend in other directions. I don't do yoga, so I don't know, I'm not doing one of those, but, you know, we have a spine. The same thing with the rod. A lot of times on a cheaper rod, they're not going to have that. So your action is, you just are fishing with a noodle. I don't even know what the heck we're fishing with. But that is value with the rods. That's why you spend $100 versus $50 or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, we really want you to get on the water, and that's the most important thing. You just start to gain these little tricks and techniques that allow you to present baits differently, and rods allow you to do that. So if you can, get there, that's always the best. Quality of guides. I heard we talked a little bit about earlier. These are microwave guides. How many of you guys have seen microwave guides? They have, a lot of people. That's good. These are my favorite guides on planet Earth. These are wonderful. When I saw these, it was like seeing Brandon Palnick for the first time. But what a microwave guide is, it's a guide designed by Doug Hannon, what's his name? What's his name? Is it Doug Hannon? Okay. Yeah, that's what it is, Doug Hannon. I'm thinking like the guy on Discovery Channel. I'm like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Who's that guy? Doug Hannon. So yeah, he designed these. This guy kind of took a lot of risks and a lot of chances throughout his life in fishing, which is something I value and something that I like to do with all my styles of fishing. So what he did in spinning rods, you are making accurate casts because you are good fishermen and you don't even know you're doing it. You're doing things you don't even know you're doing pretty much. Bait casters are designed, they give you more accurate cast, but with the microwave guides in a spinning rod, you get this accurate cast already. It's not allowing the line comes off the spool in a much larger setting. So what this guide does is it doesn't allow it to disperse into this space. It causes it to instantly go straight, which allows it to go into smaller guides. If you have a larger guide, you kind of have to allow it to gradually go in a certain direction. But having it go straight into a smaller guide already is giving you this more accurate cast instantly, which I know it sounds crazy, but I can promise you I can let you cast this rod out here if you want. I know that Thad uses these. There's a lot more people using them, but it's really cool. I guess growing up doing a lot of bait casters, like I instantly saw this as value in my spinning side because I could have used help, I'm sure. But that's kind of it. I would love to go on and bore you guys with my nerdy rod life as much as possible. But regardless, thanks for listening to me, and thank you for coming out and hanging out in this beautiful backyard.